presentation is going to be from Vanessa Gorman and Emily Knights, and they're going to be talking to us about a nurse callback system, and with the question of, does telephone follow-up post-discharge from an emergency department lead to improved patient outcomes and understanding of discharge plan instructions? That sounds like an absolutely fascinating topic, and I'd love to hear what you guys have found on that. So Vanessa holds, she is an appointed member of the Advisory Council for the USA Emergency Nursing Association, which principal aim is really to try to improve the emergency care globally. And Vanessa's, she's dedicated to working and improving nursing work conditions. In particular, she has an interest in fatigue management. So that's a good slant, actually. I think all of us can do with some advice on how to manage that. In 2015, she was co-lead in the Work Safe Victoria project and has a focus on fatigue management for emergency nurses. Emily Knights is an associate NUM at North Park Private Hospital in Victoria, and she part-time works as a hospital coordinator as well as having a research hat at Melbourne University. So I'd like you all to join us and welcome them to the stage.
Thank you, everyone, for coming to have a listen to our project today. So first of all, we will go through a few things about what the project's going to be about, but just to let you know a little bit about our hospital. We're in the outskirts of Melbourne, and last year I had a very valuable opportunity to come and commission a brand new emergency department, which is pretty rare these days, to actually walk in and open it from scratch. So we're a small unit, and nobody laugh in the room, but we see about 25 patients a day. So all you big publics out there. Perfect. So that's why this project is actually just perfect. So when we opened, what we were looking for was some quality initiatives. When we knew we were going to still be growing the business and seeing small numbers, what were some quality improvement or quality measures we could put in place to make our patient experience a little bit better and to really try and service the needs of our community? So this project, we're going to run through our rationale and how we got approval to do our quality initiative, some background about why we chose the topic, our hypothesis and methodology, and then lovely Emily's going to get up and share all our fantastic results, and we'll run through a few conclusions and maybe where we're off to from here. So our rationale was basically we wanted to improve our patient outcomes, and particularly when they were going home from the ED. We all know that it's a rush process. Everyone's needing beds, even in our little unit with 25 patients. We're still at times under pressure to move those beds along. We also knew from lots of studies around the world that adverse clinical outcomes do come at the discharge point for some emergency departments. The hot topic is about reducing representation rates in emergency departments, and we wanted an opportunity for our patients to give us some valuable feedback about the service that we were providing. And also we wanted to actually find out, how much of information do our patients retain? Do they actually understand their discharge instructions properly? So we got our approval granted through a few things. So we went through the Melbourne Clinic Ethics approval process, and we have a medical advisory committee for our hospital, and we have a very supportive general manager who supported us completely along the way with this. This is a really busy slide, but basically what we wanted to show was our idea is not revolutionary, it's not new, but what we wanted to do was put our spin on it and actually adapt it into the Australian environment. So there's studies dating back all the way to 1999 around higher morbidity and mortality rates at the discharge end of people's stays in hospital, and that telephone call follow-up actually does decrease those rates. From an emergency department perspective, this really started to come to light, particularly in the US, probably about 4 to 5 years ago. And there were some studies back from 2014 where we started to find out actually about half of patients discharged from EDs actually comply with their discharge instructions, which leads them to opportunity to deteriorate, have further complications from their discharge. And also at this point, we just want to acknowledge the work of Cabrini Hospital in Melbourne, who really has pioneered some of this nurse callback process in Australia. And I think they've just recently published some papers, which is fantastic. So the other focus for us was, we all know that patients over 65 have a higher risk of deterioration, not following their discharge instructions or getting confused about their medications. So we wanted to also hone in a little bit about our older population. For our hospital, it's also a KPI that we have to report back through to our private health funds around how we actually care for our patients over 65. So in 2017, and actually this paper's just been released in August, if anyone's really interested, it's a great little paper. A large university hospital in Oregon have just released some 18 years worth of data. So 9 years pre-nurse call follow-up being introduced into their emergency department and 9 years post of nurse call follow-up. And we all know in the US it's all about medical litigation. So you do the wrong thing, you get sued, and it costs hospitals millions on millions of dollars every year. They've actually been able to prove that they've reduced their malpractice lawsuits by nearly 30% down there by introducing nurse follow-up callback out of their ED. So what was our hypothesis? Well, we thought that if we followed a really structured, scripted sort of process in a really timely manner, that our patients, if we followed them up in the first 72 hours of going home, that we might be able to actually improve their patient outcome, and we might be able to actually make sure they had a better understanding of their discharge instructions. So what we did was every emergency department patient that was seen by a physician at our hospital and was discharged to home received a call between the 1st of February and the 31st of July. So when you hear our results are very raw, and we are still processing some of our results. We had a registered nurse follow up that phone call. Now, we are very lucky. I have 95% of my team who have a postgraduate certificate in emergency nursing. So I have a very high skill mix in the emergency department. So when you're hearing about our results in our studies, if you put that into the context of what level nurse would need to be doing this role, would be really important. And we made our phone calls 7 days a week up until about 8 o'clock at night. How do we go about it? So we followed that script and we identified our patients, popped their UR label in a book. In the book, we documented their discharge plan, what was their diagnosis when they went home, what time they went home. So they went home at 2 in the morning. We weren't calling them at 9 a.m. when they're trying to sleep. We didn't have to worry too much about consent. Part of our process when you're admitted to the hospital is that you actually consent to the hospital contacting you for feedback. And then we documented everything on our callback list. And we were able to then provide our staff with opportunity to be able to access the discharge plan instructions for that patient via our computer systems, so that when our staff were talking to them, they were also right across what the doctor had told them to do on discharge. So I know you might not be able to see the nurse callback actual script there, but essentially what it might look like is, hi, my name's Vanessa, I'm calling from North Park. Just wanted to find out how you're feeling today after going home. Is it actually convenient to talk to you right now? Because that's the first thing. You don't want to talk to them when they're in the middle of dropping the kids at school or whatever. And one of our big questions is, how are you feeling since you went home? So we want to know, are you feeling worse? Are you feeling better? And the reason why we particularly focused on that question is we then developed a medical escalation protocol for our staff. So if we actually got on the phone and the patient was significantly worse, we would potentially hang up and call 000 for them, or advise their family members to call 000 and get an ambulance to return to the hospital, or we'd organise them to come back in as a represent, planned review with our consultant or GP, OTs, whatever needed to happen. And obviously if they were feeling better, that's when we progressed. Do you understand your discharge instructions? So very interestingly for us, when we were going through our ethics approval, someone highlighted, well, what if you ring a patient and the relatives died? Or what if you ring a patient that came in with a mental health issue and they're distressed? How are your staff going to deal with that? So we actually wrote up a distress protocol, and our staff then follow a 4-stage process on how to deal with patients or relatives in distress when we call them. So our first thing is we stop the script and we listen to our patients, and we ask open-ended questions, and then we actually escalate that to the doctor or the nurse in charge. And if it was an emergency in a mental health crisis, we may escalate that through to our intake team or call 000 if we think they're a suicide risk. And we also have attached to our project a mental health nurse/counsellor that we can actually make referrals to our patients or relatives for. So with that, it's now time to hear some of our early results, and so I might hand over to Emily, who's going to pass those through to you.
Thanks, Vanessa. So I'm Emily. So as we were saying, we're still collating a lot of the findings, but I can tell you some results so far. This graph here shows our total nurse follow-up calls in the 6-month period, so from February to July. That line across there is the number of people we successfully contacted, so spoke to on the phone, and the darker red is the number of people who were discharged home. So in total, 716 people were successfully spoken to out of a potential 1,120. The reasons why we couldn't speak to everyone included people not picking up the phone, post 3 attempts to call, incomplete registration, so numbers being incorrect on our system or no number given at the time of registration. If they're from a non-English speaking background, so we didn't have interpreter services at the time of the call, and if there was lack of time or resources to call. So we did our callbacks during normal business hours, a normal day-to-day running of an ED department, so we didn't have protected time at the time of the callback. I'll just go through a few more of the results through this table here. So the first ones I've already spoken about. Some other interesting things that we realised, that 95% of people were satisfied with their care, and without prompting, 24 people mentioned that they appreciated the follow-up phone call. And if you wanted to know a little bit more about patients' perception of the follow-up phone calls, I've got a poster number 14 down in the exhibition hall, which explains a bit of a qualitative aspect of our callbacks. This table here I'm going to talk about a bit more thoroughly throughout the rest of the presentation. So this one shows that 103 people needed clinical advice over the phone at the time of callback. 179 needed their discharge plan re-explained. 30 patients were asked to represent to get reassessed by the ED RMO, and 41 people were encouraged to go back to GP instead of potentially representing back to the emergency department. So this is a little bit of our monthly progression over the 6-month period. So the red line at the top is the total people we spoke to on the phone in the 6-month period, and the blue line is the clinical advice given. So on average, 17 people needed clinical advice each month. So some common clinical advice that we gave over the phone, the most common being advice around analgesia in regards to safety and frequency and can I take analgesia. And the second most is when should I go visit my GP? In regards to getting results or removal of stitches, etc. And other questions were very specific to their clinical conditions. So how long am I contagious for? How long do I need in regards to gastro or shingles or influenza? Some other interesting findings that we have collated so far is the total amount of people needing their discharge plan re-explained. So the red line again is the amount of people we spoke to, and the blue little graph there shows the amount of people that need their discharge plan re-explained. So on average, it was 30 people were asked. On average, 30 people per month needed their discharge plan re-explained. So common discharge plan instructions was whether they were taking their prescribed medications, that they were attending their specialist outpatients appointments, if they had booked to see their local doctor, if they organised theatre or done their follow-up allied health assessments or got their specialised equipment. Another interesting finding was that there was 30 people that were asked to represent to North Park ED in total. So out of the 30 people over the 6-month period, 11 of them needed to be admitted, secondary to clinical deterioration post-discharge, who were identified through the follow-up calls. 12 of them, 11 were admitted, 12 of them were discharged home post-review by the ED RMO, and 7 patients did not arrive for review. At the time of callback, we also identified that 14 people represented to another hospital for assessment. There might have possibly been more people that we don't know about. It was only at the time of callback that we identified that. In regards to GP follow-up, so 41 people were encouraged or advised to go back to their GP for reassessment, which could have potentially decreased our representation rates. So how did we determine people had clinically deteriorated over the phone? So the most obvious... the most obvious being if they were clearly short of breath on the phone, having difficulty speaking to us. Other ways that we could determine this is if they had ongoing uncontrollable pain despite regular analgesia, and if they were feeling worse post-discharge despite implementing all our discharge plan instructions. So everyone that was discharged home received written discharge plan instructions by the doctor at the time of discharge. So other issues we were able to address over the phone is medical certificates. So it doesn't mean much to us, but means a lot to the patients. Chasing up those medical certificates so we could send them out to them. TAC or work cover forms and just Medicare-related inquiries as well. So in conclusion, for what we know so far, follow-up calls post-discharge from an ED can improve patient outcomes. It can identify people who have clinically deteriorated out in the community, and it can provide patients with clinical advice post-discharge from a health professional, such as when should I visit my GP, when should I take my analgesia, and when do my stitches come out, and provides a platform to address any issues or questions regarding their discharge plan instructions. This is just a few of our references, and I suppose it's question time.
Sorry, thank you. Thanks. Yeah, fantastic, guys. Great study and great idea. I'll throw it out to the audience. Any questions from anyone in the audience? Yes?
Can I just ask, you've identified that you're a relatively new emergency department, and as the news gets out there, you'll continue to grow. Just wondering what your strategies are around maintaining this, given that you've identified that you don't have time.
So probably... so the question for those that didn't hear is, as we get busier, which every emergency department is going to do, how are we going to protect the time to do this work, because we value the quality initiative? So the answer to that is I've just been successful in writing the business case to actually have protected nurse callback time. So some of our raw data at the moment, we've been able to show how many minutes we know takes to make the phone call, and then we can times that by the amount of patients who are discharged home. So at the moment, we started it last week, we have 12 hours of protected nurse callback shift time. So we do that on a Monday, Wednesday and a Friday for 4 hours each day, and full support that as we continue to grow, that we can roll that across to 5 days a week and increase the hours as need be. So we're very, very lucky.
I had a question, of course. I think it's a fantastic idea, and one I wanted to know was just actually what was the baseline representation rate for your ED, unexpected representation rate for the ED, and then how many do you think of those that you identified from the callbacks that you would have then otherwise helped prevent a readmission to ED? And the second question to that was, what was the representation rate and the admission representation rate? So ones that we potentially might have been able to capture, but obviously that's a contentious issue.
So this is the hard part for us, because when we opened, we decided this was our the point that made us a little bit different as an emergency department. So we opened on November 29, and pretty much our nurse callback started within about 4 weeks of us opening. So pretty much January 1, we started some testing the waters with it. So we didn't really have any hard data around our representation rates then. So, and I guess that means I probably can't answer really the second part of the question, but, you know, I've worked in public emergency departments for 20 years, and we definitely know that representations, you know, and we don't want those representation rates to be high anyway. So we're kind of happy that at the moment we're able to pick up 30% of our patients who've gone home that are obviously showing us there's signs of deterioration, and we're able to provide a further service for them, which I think from our quality hats putting them on is around understanding that ED, you know, for the patient, the care doesn't stop the minute they walk out your door, that they're still going home unwell sometimes, and you know, that they know someone's still looking out for them is I guess, a nice feeling, and that's the sort of feedback that we're hearing at the moment. So even if they have to come back in and represent, yeah. Are they protected for any clinical advice they give over the phone?
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. So obviously we follow a pretty strict script about stuff, and we have different escalation plans also, that if obviously there were, you know, things that they feel they couldn't answer, we have 100% support of our emergency physicians who are more than happy to take over the phone call if it was something that we weren't sure on how to answer. But essentially, if there's any sign of clinical deterioration, our stopping point is we would like for you to come back in and see the doctor again. Yeah. Yeah, pretty much come back in, unless, if it's outside of their scope. But as I said, you know, most of my staff have around probably an average of 10 to 12 years of emergency nursing experience. So, yes, we are protected by the hospital. Yeah, and legally, and that's part of our ethics approval as well. Our ethics department said that our staff were protected by the hospital for clinical advice. Yeah.
That's a great question. I wonder too then, you know, are they updating the discharge letter to say that there was contact then, and does that then get faxed to the GP? You know, is there
so in our computer system, our nurses have access to be able to put in new clinical comments. So if there's advice given over the phone or, you know, please go back to your GP or whatever, we can update those clinical comments. At this stage, we don't then refax the discharge summary, but obviously our GPs would have already received that letter anyway, and hopefully if they're being asked to go back, the patients are explaining it. So, yeah, hopefully.
Well, thank you very much. Oh, sorry, one last question. Go ahead.
Do you foresee, or have you already used any of this data to change your pre-discharge planning or the way you deliver the pre-discharge advice?
Yep, so the question is, have we used any of our pilot data to change the way we discharge our patients? Yes, we have. So we've recently just implemented the new journey boards into each of our cubicles, which helps the patient to track their journey through the ED, including their disposition. And we've also implemented a bit of a safety net. So obviously nurses, doctors get busy, and sometimes the doctors just hand the letter out and all of a sudden the nurse turns around and the bed's empty. We now let our doctors know that they are to grab a sticker and put it in our nurse callback book as well. So even if the nurse has failed at that point to have contact with the patient, there's also our doctor making sure that that patient's UR number's gone into the nurse callback book, and our clerical team, when they're collating all of our histories at discharge, are ensuring that our discharge summary is being either faxed or emailed to the GPs, which we were falling down a little bit on at the start. So, yeah.
Well, join me all and thank Emily and Vanessa for a fantastic talk, guys. Thank you.